The first item on the agenda is a discussion on the dollar amount of a potential increase in ad valorem property tax revenue, including a tax rate that exceeds the county's certified tax rate, purpose for the potential increase in ad valorem property tax revenue, and the approximate percentage increase in ad valorem tax revenue for the county based on the proposed increase. To kind of introduce this agenda item, our county assessor, Chris Polson, has a presentation for us. Chris, we'll turn it to you.
Wow. I need one more cord. Jeez. I was asked to do a presentation today on the overall scope of what we're doing here today. The only time you have, well, let me just get into this here. The 2018 general county budget was $86 million, but based on the documents filed with the state auditor's office, 6.7 million of that came from fund balance, which means the county actually budgeted more revenue than what they collected. That additional revenue actually came from the fund balances, and that represented 7.8% of the 2018 budget. The way the certified tax rate works, and we'll get a little bit into this, but I wanted to give you an overview of why we're holding this meeting. The certified tax rate is set every year. And through the truth in taxation process, a taxing entity cannot collect more money than what it collected the year before without going through this process. So as values go up, the State Tax Commission automatically drops the tax rate to ensure that you're not collecting more money just because property values went up. On the other side of that is, as values go down, the tax rate is automatically increased as a protection to the entities. So again, they're not receiving a windfall, but there's also a safety net there to protect the entities on shortfalls. This is done every single year. Utah County is one of the fastest growing counties, not only in the state, but according to studies, the metropolitan area of Orem and Provo is actually all of Utah County. And we have 3 metro areas in Utah that are labeled as 3 of the 20 fastest growing metro areas in the nation. One way that the county does receive additional funds is through new growth. So in addition to values that are protected under truth and taxation, you do receive additional funds for new construction, new business personal property accounts. So those types of increases were $1.3 million in 2018. And later in the slideshow, I'll show you how that works into the formula. Another source of revenue is the motor vehicle fee. It's not a tax, but it's a fee. In the year 2000, the county represented 14% of the overall property tax. This fee is actually distributed based on your portion of the property tax. By 2017, that had reduced down to 9%. And you can see where the allocations have changed. So in 2000, there was $19.9 million collected in a motor vehicle here in Utah County, of which Utah County got 14%, or the $2.78 million. However, because Utah County's portion of the overall tax diminished down to 9%, even though $31 million was collected, Utah County has not received any more than what they were collecting 17 years ago.
Chris, why is our percentage drop?
The largest reason is other entities are going through the truth and taxation process, which is the only way to increase your rate. So as other entities have gone through the rate increase process, they've gained a larger portion of the overall tax rate.
So essentially, we're punished to some degree because the other entities have gone through this process and we've kept our certified rate in
This
conjunction with the state.
this is truly one of those instances where no action actually is a punishment.
But this is motor vehicle.
This is just the motor vehicle.
Right, just motor vehicles.
Right, yeah.
Yeah,
No,
this
but
is
the
just
overall
motor
collection,
vehicle.
the 9%'s the overall collection rate.
Right, so if Utah County had maintained at the 14%, in 2017, Utah County would have received another $1.5 million. Instead, to answer your question, the $1.5 million went out to other taxing entities because they had those percentages diminished for Utah County.
So if, and maybe you'll get to it, so if both the school bonds that are voted for pass and we didn't do anything, then in essence, our portion of the collection potentially diminishes even greater?
I think the bond setting process is outside of this rate setting process. Bonds are not actually held to the truth and taxation process. There we go. So at 9%, Utah County is actually in the lowest position across the entire state when it comes to their percent of the overall property tax as it comes to the general operational property tax. And to put this a little bit clearer, because property taxes are based on value, Utah County does have the lowest rate in the entire state, but the average house value according to the State Tax Commission, and I had to use State Tax Commission numbers here from their reports because we're looking at state numbers to be consistent. Utah County has the lowest average property tax among these entities here at the 9%. You can see Summit County has the second lowest, but because their average house value is in the $1 million range, they're collecting far more, even though they only represent a very low percentage. So this is to give you a relationship among counties proximal and of similar size to Utah County. Utah Association of Counties does I don't believe it's annual, but maybe an annual study. The number of employees per 10,000 is part of that study. Utah County at 17.9 is actually 29 out of 29. They have the fewest amount of employees per 10,000 of any county in Utah. And you can see the differences there of counties of similar size. These are all the second and first class counties in Utah. So getting back to the rate setting process, the first column says percent change, the gray column to the left. That's a reduction of 6%. That's because values on average went up 6%, so the rate had to drop by 6%. So that's what that 6% number is there. The next one in the green is $25 million. That's the amount that was collected through property tax and distributed through to Utah County. The orange represents the new growth. That's the $1.3 million we talked about earlier. So combining those two, you get a certified tax revenue with new growth of $27+ million. And so they set the rate based on what it would collect that $27 million, and that's why there was a 6% drop in the rate. If Utah County had not gone through this process, if the state had allowed them to maintain their 2017 rate, the difference is the 47 that you see there, which would have generated $1.75 million. You often hear about entities saying we're just retaining the rate. That actually is a tax increase when they state they're just retaining the rate, because it is a tax increase.
Actually, by state code, you're not even supposed to be able to say that. You need to tell people the truth.
I have actually been in these types of meetings where the person running the meeting says, we're here to lower your taxes. which is a gross misstatement. But yes, you're right.
But it's kind
It
of,
does happen.
and it's interesting though too, because, so technically last year, even though the rate drops by 6%, it wasn't a tax decrease.
It was not a tax decrease on average.
Right.
Now, again, we're working with averages, so you could have an area that's going up in 12, 13%. And so they will see increases in taxes because their valuations are going up higher than other areas that were only experiencing 5 or 4%. And so there are shifts in this process all the way around. But in the rate setting process, they work on aggregate level. So it's actually an average across the board.
Interesting.
So based on the state tax commission's $344,000 average residential home value, if that had been the case and you had retained that rate for 2018, which you did not, it would have been an $8.89 annual increase to the average homeowner and $16.17 for the business with the associated value. So
Can you go back real quick, just one quick slide? I just need a number. Nope, sorry, one more.
right here.
No, the one with that one. That, okay, thanks.
If Utah County had moved the rate in 2018 to match the second lowest rate, which is Summit County, it would have generated an additional $3.3 million. That would have been a 12.3% increase in the property tax of Utah County.
Yeah, the county portion.
It would have been about a 1.23% increase on the overall tax. And there's the associated increases on averages it would have impacted. Again, the budget was passed for 2018 at $886 million. So you're talking 3.35 million is 3.9% increase to your overall budget, because that only represents, the 3.3 represents about half of the deficit that was actually budgeted for in 2018, because $6.7 million came out of fund balance. So if you apply that back to the chart that you had me go back to, you can see that by matching Summit County, it would have increased the average home tax, just the county portion, from $139 up to $155. And it shifted that from a 9% to 10%. So you're still the lowest in ratio compared to all the other counties. The funding, this is general fund money. So Public Works, Public Safety, Judicial, Health Department, Administrative. I should point out that there are other sources of revenue. The assessor's office, the recorder's office, the treasurer's office are not part of the general fund. We're actually budgeted out of a separate fund. So this would have no impact on those departments. So these are the departments where you'd have to identify where those funds would be allocated to if a decision is made to do something in that direction. That's all I had on the presentation, if there's any questions.
I've got one question. You're referring to the budget and, you know, the 6 point something million dollars that was taken out. But that was a budget number. The actual number is 3 million.
Okay.
It actually was taken out. So the 6 point, if we're looking at numbers, it was 3.178 million that was actually taken out. Not although because budgets are fluid, they go through the year, and so that 3.178 was what was actually taken.
Yeah, this number
For
actually
what
just
year?
came from the, this is for 2018.
Right.
These numbers actually just came from the state auditor's office, what was Our, and every other county reported to the state auditor's office. And that was the line item for fund balance that was put in. As you said, it's fluid, it can change.
Yeah,
I know my budget every year, I've returned funds back at the end
Right.
of the year.
A and C, and we're talking, yeah.
Yeah, so that happens all the time.
Sure, but see,
So
the other
this
problem
is-
is you also can't pay attention to what we do on December 31st because we've traditionally taken $5 million out of fund balance to allow us to get through. So we always need to look at the year end when it comes in like May or June
Exactly.
for that
And
year.
so, I mean, we had $6.3 million approximately in there that we put in our budget. But when we get to the end of the year, it actually grows to about $8 million, because we're trying to make sure and cover everything so that we're not crossing that barrier and having problems. So I scratched out the 8 million because it's just a budgeting process, but it's the actual 3.1 that we're talking about in which we took that out of fund balance. Not 6, it's not, sometimes we focus on the 6, but it's not, it was 3.1.
Do we have, for some historical reference, and I don't know if we'd have that number, what it would have been for the prior 2 years?
Deal. Well,
I just think that would, because
I-
for me,
yeah.
one of the things that I always want to look at is a pattern. Where are we going? You know, is this a consistent pattern, a consistent dollar amount? Are we gradually growing in the dollar amount that we're pulling there? You know, so I think those patterns are a good indication too.
so I'll give you some of those numbers. I'm gonna start back. I'll go back to 2014, I guess, 2013. So 2013, and this is a net change that went into the fund balance. So that means that we were growing
We're
in
growing.
2013. There was $3,649,000 in a growth, and our ending fund balance was $25,912,302. So that was the ending fund balance on that. And realize that we can't have anything in the fund balance that is over our collections for property taxes. That becomes problematic for us. So just keep that in mind as we look at the next years. So in 2014, we put into the fund balance $2,468,522, which put our fund balance ending at $28,380,824. And I'll go back to our property taxes on that one was $28,536.47. So we're barely below what before we have to start doing tax.
Moving it over to our capital expense slush fund.
Yeah, I didn't want to say it in that manner, but that's typically what we do is we put it in the capital project fund.
Commissioner Grover
or-
created that because they were
Or we give a
overcollecting.
tax break. Those are the two options that come in.
Options.
Then we look at,
So it was told to me.
2015. In 2015, we registered a negative 893,625. But the reason why we registered a negative on that is because it looked like with the money that was in there, it was gonna go over what we had on property taxes. So we transferred $1.7 million into capital projects. If we would've left that 1.7, it would've bumped us over, so there was a transfer into the capital projects.
Which year are you talking?
This is 2015.
15?
2016, there was a 601, 307 transfer that went into the general fund, but there was a transfer again into capital projects of $1.6 million because we were gonna be close to that limit, so it went into our, into that account. And then 2017, I don't have the 2017 here unless I have it somewhere else. Let's see, hang on. What seemed to happen, and this is my perception on it, is that we started to have an imbalance that started happening with our budget. If we look over a long period of time for budgeting, which I tend to want to look long period instead of short little myopic 1 or 2 years, we had a decrease that happened in our general fund when we got rid of the ICE program. Now the ICE program, if you look back, It was about a $4.5 million to a $5.5 million revenue account that came into the county. And with that happening, it started to spin us into a different direction, to where we had to look for other resources coming out of our reserves account or our general fund to fund. And so when I look at it on a budgeting basis, as the years in the past we were putting money into or putting them into the capital project, it showed a pathway where our revenues and our expenses had a somewhat of a parallel, or we were bouncing back and forth and putting money into a capital project. It seemed to me, in looking historically, that we had a healthy funds going forward. Then we had that happen to us with the ICE program, which had a collision, and we had a collision, and that collision between our revenues and our expenses did happen. And going back to our original looking at what happened in this year, you know, that $3.1 million could have been covered, as I just kind of briefly analyze it, if we would have had the revenues that we would have been generated off of the ICE program. The problem, as when I continue to look at this, is usually when you have a decrease in revenue, you typically will decrease in your expenses. But there was not a decrease in expenses. There was a little bit, because if you look at the years from 2015, 2016, and 2017, and it was always told to us that the ICE program was being funded by overtime. In 2015, that was $1.8 million that was in overtime in the corrections. 2016, it was $1.8 million, and in 2017, it went to 1.5. So there was a decrease of $300,000. So if we took $4.5 million on that thing and decreased it by $300,000, that'd put us at $4.2 million. Now, granted, you do have overhead on there. You have the cost for facilities. Even if you were to take $1 million off of that 3.2, we were short 3.178. Comes pretty close to where we start to break even. So when I look at budgeting practices with this, I want to look at a long-term basis and wonder if we're going to grow out of it. Or, and this is up to the sheriff on an ICE program, do we look at that and get that program back? Maybe, I don't know. I don't even know if they're looking at that. Or do we start to do a decrease somewhere in the expenses that is causing this tilt for us to go in a direction that throws us off?
So I don't disagree at all. Actually, we've had this conversation. In the sheriff's department, we have had a budget, and I hate using the word crisis because it always makes it sound like, you know, this horrible thing. But it does seem like we have been at odds between the sheriff's department and the commission since we eliminated ICE. And that is true. That the revenue went down, the expenses stayed constant. By the way, we only made those cuts off of the paperwork we got from the sheriff's department. So this was never this or that. But here's my problem. We are talking about one side, and although they are large, they also happen to be the one that, for me, it's the constitutionally mandated public safety, because I know I want to pick up the phone and call them when I'm in an emergency. So even though that is true with the ICE, and we still need to figure out with inside the sheriff's department. We still have not planned for the future in there, and by not planned, not provided the funding to be able to be ready for any future emergency. We had two bomb robots. They cost about, if I remember right, $750,000, $800,000. Mr. Brower, is that about right? Sound about right? That we bought like 10 years ago, breaking down, and they cost several $100,000 to fix, so you might as well buy a new one. And so thankfully we don't have to use these, but at the same time, you'd hate to say, oh, well, you didn't give $1 million and that bomb would have saved a school or whatever, right? Because the reality is these are the men and women who are going to run in and save our kids and things like that. But this is the part I struggle with. We as a commission have had very, very open discussion on service levels inside the county and where we can go, what we can afford to do. And when we've been talking about the salary study, we've talked about how we can't afford it and where are we going to find the money, and all the departments need to go. And then I hear us saying, well, we're contributing more, and so we've been over collecting. Facts aren't, I mean, I'm not disagreeing with your numbers at all. I'm just saying, if we're going to say we've been collecting the right tax rate, and then everything we get from HR says we're behind market or under market in everything that we're doing, and that's who's really doing the service, that's what I don't understand. That part of the math doesn't add up for me. The other part that for me, and obviously I gain nothing by raising taxes because I'm a taxpayer too. I personally get nothing out of it. The part that's hard for me on this is I wish the tax code were such that every year the inflationary rate, up or down, would adjust with it. That would just be nice, that as Social Security checks go up for our citizens, or whatever type of check, your cost of living, that the tax code kind of moves with it so that we could handle the inflationary thing. The reality is on the county budget, we have roughly about a 3% increase every year. The 3% comes from, we have a Sept program, which we have 13 steps that the employees, through a 30-year career, if they do the whole URS system, they get for 13 steps, 2.345% step increase from the beginning to end. So when I say out of market, that's where we take the market based on our benefits and based on our wages. Our starting wage is considered to be slightly below market, and we know why, because as we do the study, everything still keeps moving, so we end up just a little behind. We're not far, but we are a little bit. But when you take that and you're not able to keep up, and then you look at the cost of roads and the cost of constructions and how everything's going up, we are budgeting into the red. We have sufficiently budgeted into the red the last couple of years. And so when we have all those things that come up, and we have, jail medical, when Commissioner Lee and I came in, jail medical, the first year they had budgeted, I believe, $350,000 or $400,000. They far exceeded it, went up to about $750,000, for example. The year that we were in, we decided to give them the same $400,000. We restricted the other $400,000 because we wanted to see if it was an abnormality. Turns out it wasn't. Turns out medical has just continued to go up for everybody, including the government. And so that's getting more and more expensive every day. And so that's where that 3% comes in. So with that 3%, again, taking the budget of $86 million for this year, whether that number ends up being 85, 84, or 87, because everybody knows we just opened the budget for additional monies and have other things coming. At 3% next year, that would put our budget at $88,830,314 based on that. And the next year it would be $91 million. So it continues to go up by $2.5 to $3 million at 3%. The other reason is not the employee's cost, because we've been able to do benefits where our insurance we've become a good partner with our insurance carrier, and we're able to have insurance costs that are affordable for the county itself for the insurance that we provide. But we have contractual increases every year. Our services go up. The cost of fuel, we pay more for fuel. We pay more for construction. All of the services that we do not provide, that we have to contract with, they have built-in adjustments. So based on that, that's how we get the 3%. So the concern for me is, not that everybody isn't doing the right thing, but it's been my practice, it's been my observation, that since I've been in the commission, the first year was kind of interesting. Commissioner Lee and I were not able to participate the year before. For some reason, we were kept down. So our first year in office, like 10 months in when we did this, it was really eye-opening because we just kind of listened to everybody, and I kept hearing everybody say, well, it's a game, it's a game, it's a game. Well, I didn't understand why it's a game, because to me, we're talking about serving the residents of Utah County, of which now there's over 600,000, right? And what would happen is every department head would come in, I need this, I need this, I need this, I need this. Okay. And sometimes we felt like they asked for it, they didn't really need it, and they were asking for 10 things because they really wanted 5. That was how the commission was kind of treating this, or at least that's, again, how I felt this was being treated. I'm not saying that's how Commissioner Lee and I ever felt. I know I didn't, and I'm not going to speak for him in that way. I always went to work, and for example, the Sheriff's Department at that time was in my portfolio. And I went down and went line by line, literally line by line, over the several $40 million items that they had. The additional 81 requests, and we went through, and I'd say, why is this for? What's this for? What's this for? And, and then we went through it. By the time we got there with everybody I dealt with, I felt like we were getting exactly what the citizens wanted, and we were still not getting all the things that we need potentially for the future. Sheriff Tracy used to always tell me, he says, the difference is, Greg, I can't plan for every disaster. He says, so my question is do you fund us at a level where we are 30% ready for every potential disaster? Are we 50%? Or, do we really blow the budget, go like Salt Lake County and be ready for absolutely everything? He and I both agree as a principle that you can't be ready for everything, but we need to do the best. We train, we get our people ready, but as far as all the tools, some of those, it is a hope and a prayer because we have been underfunding them. The reason I say that is because if we're going to hold to true budget numbers, every year we get staff requests. Half of the department heads in this county are elected officials, just like I am, and they have a sworn duty, or, well, I say it's a sworn duty. They have a duty to the people as well, and I believe them all to be great people, people of high moral character that come in and say, this is what I need, this is what I need to do my state statutes, perform the job the way I need. And unfortunately, every year that they come in, everything they ask for, the commission says, we can't afford it, we can't afford it, we can't afford it. Keep doing more with less. Keep doing more for less. If we're going to continue to budget that way, fine. Well, it's not fine because the residents of Utah County, in my opinion, we're the ones that suffer. There is a service level that is potentially that the public needs to be engaged in. Is it, for example, in the health department, I've learned over the last little while, we have, and Ralph could correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe it's roughly about one nurse in a school for 7,500 kids. That's about a rough estimate in most of school districts. Yeah, a little over that, okay? That's a scary thing for somebody who has a wife and kids that are in an elementary school that where all these things happen and potentially some of these that we have one nurse for all these kids, and it's because of funding. It's not that the health department doesn't ask for it, and we don't need the national average. We figured a way to do more, but if we're going to continue and tell everybody, no, you can't have this because we can't afford it, and you can't have this because we can afford it, and then say we have extra money, to me, especially the elected officials, because again, they ran and did the same thing we all did to get into office, they should be able to say, here's what I need to do the job, and people elect them because of that. And so if, Jeff Buman says, I need 25 attorneys. Here's why. The court case has gone crazy. He's accountable. He can say that. If Chris Polson says, I need, as the assessor, I need 4 new assessors because of new growth to handle that, then shame on the commission that we don't give those things and we think, and not that we have been doing this, but shame on us for not giving them all the same things they need, and we need to find a way. Now, at the same time, I do know, and I do agree with this, that it seems like the commission is always tied to the post, and we're getting the whippings, even though everybody else has the requests. I think it needs to be a team effort where publicly we are all on the same page and agree to what that level is, but that also means the public needs to engage. So for me, I think the commission's sending mixed messages, because if we're going to keep saying we can't afford that and we keep cutting when people come, and again, not whether we trust them or we whatever, then we need to find where that balance is, be very open about what service levels we have. So like some are easily measurable. The recorder's office, you bring your document in, they can tell you we're 15 days from filing or from recording it. Well, the state statute may be 7. And he says, well, I need 2 more people to be able to do that. And the commission says, well, you can have 1. Good luck. And then at the end of the year, he's at 12. He's still a failure. He told us what he needed, and maybe he could have, right? Those are some of the things that I think we need to do better as a commission at getting those things taken care of. So anyway.
Right. Thank you. Appreciate the information shared so far. Chris' presentation. I greatly appreciate the thoughts of both the additional commissioners. I would add a couple of things that brought me to today's discussion. Having looked over the numbers as Commissioner Lee presented them earlier myself, I also recognize the ICE contract seems to be a year things shifted. We also grew slowly out of a recession in those earlier years. And one of the great challenges government faces is with exponential growth, the $1.3 million that the new growth creates actually eventually doesn't keep up with the additional demand that it puts on us. And I think especially when we look at our employee situation, we've kind of reached that point where we're getting enough demand from the new growth for employees, for proper compensation, that we're falling and starting to lag there. So I think there's certainly areas, as Commissioner Lee pointed out, that we can make some adjustments, in particular in relation to our revenue and our cuts as a result of the ICE program leaving. But I also, looking into the future, am very concerned about our capacity to continue to provide adequate compensation to the employees so that we can provide quality service. The greatest asset we have as a county government to the people we're charged to serve are the people we have working for us. And it becomes critical that we can attract, recruit, and maintain proper employees so that we can deliver that quality service. And so for me, this discussion today came from a fact that when we look at operating costs, buying supplies, whether that's a bomb robot or different things, there's probably areas in our budget where we can cut and begin to significantly save. But looking into our future, how do we make a stopgap for a year or two that allows us to make sure our salary compensations stay competitive and we move forward? And I think for me personally, and I know I'm not supposed to use this term as Chris mentioned, but maintaining a similar rate as we've had in the past allows us to fill that stopgap measure in with very minimal impact on the taxpayer, but it allows us to fill that gap in compensation so that we can continue to provide employees and the number of employees to provide those services as we work through those cuts and other mechanisms to make sure we can get adequate equipment and supplies to people as well.
Another thought I had just is we talk about service and service level and what that's expected, and we're different than other counties. Our roads are not in our general fund. We don't have a library system. We don't do golf courses. We don't do municipal.
It works out well.
We don't do municipal services. Yeah, I mean, it's, so there's a certain expectation, I think, that the citizens, want and enjoy in this county that we don't get involved with. And so when we look at tax rates and we say, oh, we're the lowest in the state, and then we compare it with others who they put into their funds libraries and golf courses and municipal services, yeah, they're going to have to tax more to do that. They're going to have to tax more. And then, we hear, well, when it comes to employees, that, how many employees we have. Well, of course we have less employees because we don't have everybody running municipal services or golf courses and libraries. They're not part of the employee bank that we have. So it makes sense to me. I know those are kind of used as fodder for, look, we need to be equal with everybody else. But I think being equal with everybody else is that we start doing things like municipal services and buying golf courses and countywide library services, and the list goes on and on with that. And I personally don't think that that's what the citizens of this county is looking for. I think that they want, I can put it, government for the most part to kind of stay out of those things, although some of our cities do it. And we know that our cities do the libraries, they do the municipal services, the golf courses. It was a deliberate action that has been, and it's way before us. This has been going on for a long time, and I applaud it. I take it as a badge of honor that I come from Utah County, and this is how the county is run. It's a little bit different. So that level of service. I did want to also point out, because I hear often being compared to other counties, and it's hard. We're an anomaly. Utah County is. There's no one really truly that we can compare to. Salt Lake's too big. Davis and Weber County, them put together, we're as big as they are, or we're bigger than they are. So we stand kind of alone in our own little world of comparisons. But I had heard in the past this comparison between Davis and Weber County on Utah County in our general fund, and there was kind of an argument that we need to increase our funding for the general fund because of what Davis and Weber County did. So I went out and did an analysis with it, and it's the things that they have in there. We have to compare apples for apples. They have things in there like human services. I don't even know what exactly that is, but their assessor's office, their recorder's office, you know, their justice courts, if I'm reading across the line correctly, treasurer's office. There's a lot of things that they have in the Arts Council, Operations Administration, Property Management, Information Technology. They have in their general fund. So for us to say, okay, we budgeted for 86, and their budgeting was close to ours at 85 and 74 is really not comparing appropriately, because if we do the same thing that they're doing, our total budget would roughly be around 104 million if we put all those funds into the general fund the same. So that argument of comparison with Davis and Weber County falls pretty flat for me, unless we do a straight comparison across. So again, and I agree, and I'll even state it this way. When we started looking at property taxes, and I'm looking at the law on this, I really thought, and there's been some senators that told me, that they thought the counties were going to come back on the inflationary part. They put it in place, and they thought there was going to be an inflationary measure. But the counties never came back.
Interesting.
And so they got us in this stuck stagnation, and I agree. Things move. We can't maintain on new growth. It just won't happen. It's not going to happen with new growth. But if we're going to do some comparisons as well, our sales tax is quite a bit higher than we have with other, Salt Lake and, Davis and Weber County, quite a bit in a comparison basis. And so service levels for me, and what that service level is in our county, I think is the most important part. And then the only thing I can do is to see if we have a healthy formula. If our formula is healthy, then we should be able to have some sort of separation between our expenses and our revenues, so that we're not bouncing back and forth. And then our service, our general fund, if we're outside when we have some bumps here and there, if it projects back off to where we have that separation and going in the right direction, it seems to be a healthy budget. And as I look at it, it looks pretty healthy. There's some anomalies that we can work through. I don't know where it's at. I'm sensitive to where, if the formula's off a little bit, how that's going to work for us. Should we adjust it a little bit to kind of get there? And I applaud this kind of thinking for, what it will do. My concern is that if we're talking about $1 or $2 million in an adjustment, that I don't think our formula is. I don't think our formula is that far off with a healthy budget and healthy revenues.
So I completely agree with you. I've always hated, and I've never liked the comparison to everybody else, because yeah, it has fallen short for me, because I agree Salt Lake's way over. But there are some trends in Utah County right now that budget-wise do make me pause and think, okay, we need to be ready. Because again, to go through this process, what we're talking about is we have to talk about it to raise it. We don't even need to talk to you guys to lower it. So to me, if we go through this process and we end up raising it, and it turns out, yeah, we have more money than we need, obviously, I can't speak for a commissioner, but knowing these two and the one that's going to be replacing me, I guarantee they'd all lower the rate, because they do not want to overcollect and overtax their people. I know that to be how they all are. The part that's concerning is the new growth, just so people understand. A new deputy with machinery, equipment, I should say, or a new county employee costs us roughly about $75,000 to $80,000. That's with benefits, with package, and everything like that. So to keep up with new growth, it's hard. And Commissioner Lee's right. We are an anomaly. The hard part for us is we have a different county setup than Salt Lake. We have a general plan that where we try and force the cities to provide a lot of the utilities and the services for that, and we take care of it. The problem is the landscape of Utah County. We have a sometimes non-algae infested, beautiful lake right in the middle. Well, that creates a problem for our sheriff's department, and heaven forbid if you're the one on Lake Mountain, or all of a sudden you're up Covered Bridge, or all of a sudden you're up Provo Canyon, or we have a lot, or AF Canyon. We have a lot of areas that they have to cover. And so we can't really use that national rule of 1 per 1,000. It doesn't work because we have different terrain than those people in DC who are covering flat land, and you can see 1,000 people in a room. So yeah, it's, you know, easier to do or whatever. So we have those also unique challenges. To cover a lot of people we've had, I mean, one of the first complaints I ever remember with was somebody calling and saying, you know, I'm a county resident, one of the just less than 10,000 actual county residents, meaning they don't belong to an incorporated city. And they said, well, it took the sheriff's department 45 minutes to get here. And I said, you know, obviously I was concerned. I called the sheriff's department and they're like, well, yeah, do you know where they live? No. After I found out why, of course it does, because by the time you drive down to Santaquin, take the road all the way out, you know, again, it sometimes is a very narrow road. You don't have time to respond. And so the only question is if we're going to do that, do we need more deputies out patrolling or this and that? We still also have staff increases every year that have come to us, and we have more than 20 staff increases every year on our budget that have come to us. So if you take that $1 million of new growth, that is totally encumbered by just the staff requests. And staff does have to keep increasing. When we say, you know, we don't want government to be bloated, I agree. And this county does not bloat. We do a great job. But as growth comes, we have to also add our number of employees. Just so the public's aware, as the North County grows, it's not really convenient for a single mother who might need some of the county services from the health department or any of the other services we provide. It might not be as feasible, again, to drive all the way around that lake from Saratoga or Eagle Mountain and come down to the Provo building. So maybe there's buildings and stuff that need to go up to serve all of the citizens, right? And so we have another thing. So the question that I've always had, and this is how I believe, and this is what I ran on, and that is, we should have a tax rate where we are setting enough aside that we can run 1 year, where we have full reserves of 1 year, which right now we're not able to do that. We're not far, but the trend is not good in that direction, but where we should have full reserves. And if we have an overage in a year, wait 1 more year and see, because it might recorrect itself. And then if not, you can lower the rate. And or we know with those expanding services, do you set it aside? Because bonding, Commissioner Lee and I have had many discussions, not against each other, with each other, where we buy a building for $4 million and we pay for it for 25 years, and so it's an $8 million cost. Well, is that really the best use of taxpayer money when we could take $50 on the average home right now and then in 10 years pay cash and build the facilities we need? I don't know. To me, I prefer that way. I'd rather not keep having bonds, because bonds, to me, when cities or things do that, they should be used in an emergency basis, because something happened or some really good deal came, like the I-15 corridor, when all the mayors and the commission got together and said, hey, if we bond for this, we can continue this project all the way. That, to me, is the appropriate use for government bonding. So for me, I think, you know, there is a reason to talk about potential dollar increases. And again, all we're talking about today is a dollar amount, so that we can have all those conversations, engage with the public and say, what do you want? Or as a service level or this and that, and have the real numbers and get everybody engaged. But for me, it's a definite need. It has always bothered me to budget in the red. I just don't think that's responsible for us. So anyway.
All right. Any additional thoughts here? At this point in time, I do feel it would be appropriate to open for additional discussion for comment from the public and others interested in making comment. We will go ahead and, open that up now at this point in time for additional discussion on the proposals before you. If you would like to comment, you're welcome to come to the podium and state your name for the record and share your thoughts and comments with us.
Good evening, Jeff Buman, County Attorney. As the Commission looks at what dollar amount would be a target if there were an increase in our taxes, I did an analysis similar to what I did last year for the 2018 budget. Actually, I just took that analysis, which is still based upon 2016 caseload numbers. And this is referring only to the criminal division of my office, not the civil division, who is accompanying workload increases as well. But just to look at the criminal division to get...
They aren't all my fault.
A lot of them may, no. Just to get Utah County Attorney's Office Criminal Division to the same average caseload of the other Class 1 and 2 counties in Utah, we would need to add 5 attorneys, 2 paralegals, 3 legal assistants, and 2 victim coordinators. And the approximate cost of that would be $900,000. Of course, we don't have any space in this building, or I believe in the old courthouse. So if we had to go out and lease space, Class A office space in Provo, and correct me if I'm wrong, Richard, is about $20 to $25 a square foot. So we're looking about probably another $80,000 in rent if we were to go out on the open market. So as just a round ballpark number, I think for my office, we're looking at $1 million, more or less, just to get us the average caseload of Utah, Class 1 and 2 counties. Setting that aside, for a couple years, actually for about, I'm not sure how many years, we've been talking about a pretrial services program. Richard Nance, myself, the Sheriff's Office, we've talked about the need for a pretrial services program. I won't make the pitch again because I know you've heard it a number of times, but we all believe that it's an important program. I think the legislature is actually moving in that direction, and I will be shocked if they provide the funding as they provide the encouragement.
Yes.
But we did an analysis, and I say we, it was mostly the Sheriff's Office, with some costs from ADAPT and Wasatch Mental Health, and the approximate cost per year is $2 million. So as you look at the county attorney's office, I think we're looking about $1 million a year. And I would encourage you to include things like the pretrial services program, which really do benefit those who are in most dire straits in our county for a certain period of time.
Jeff, real quick, he's not here, and I know you don't run his department, but Tom Means, who runs our public defenders, which we're one of the great states that has to pay for it from the county level. It seems like, and I may be mistaken, and you would know more or less from your attorneys, that the county's using more public defenders or being required to use more public defenders in these cases as well. Is that been your experience, or is it still about the same level, we just are having more cases in general?
Is the rate of his appointment going up? Is that what
Yes.
you're asking?
So in other words, if we used to be doing 10% of the cases, they were getting called, but now, because it sure seems like we're getting hit with that a lot lately.
I'll tell you what I do know, and I'll admit I don't know completely, but I know during the recession from about 2008 to, I don't know, fairly recently, they went up pretty high into the 80 percentile. Of the felony cases filed by Utah County, they were providing the representation. I believe that has not diminished very much. So when I ask for $1 million, more or less, he's probably going to ask for, and by the way, this is only for felonies. This doesn't include misdemeanors or juvenile, which frankly I don't think we need right now, but he'll probably be coming back and asking for about 70 to 80% of that same amount. So if you take that into account, then we're looking at about $600,000 to $700,000 additional dollars for the public defender's office. Thank you.
Kevin Green, Americans for Prosperity, and also a taxpayer in Utah County. Since there's not specific numbers that have been put out or anything yet, I won't speak to that, but I will speak to the idea that I think it's appropriate, as Commissioner Graves has already specified that he does, to go through these budget items and find out what's appropriate, cut what isn't necessary before increasing taxes on the public. And then I also think tax increases are spoken about kind of in a bubble by each taxing entity where we assume it's not going to be a burden on the taxpayer. But when there's over a dozen taxing entities that want to increase our taxes this year, it does add up to a lot. On the ballot, statewide, we've got a gas tax that could possibly hit us. That's a couple $100s a year per family. Possible state sales tax increase, which isn't over $100 per family. I know Bill here, we both are Pleasant Grove residents, at the city level have received in the last year or so a public safety bond tax increase, a road fee tax increase. They're discussing, Parks and Rec tax increase. Down in Commissioner Ivy's neck of the woods, Elk Ridge has discussed in the last couple of years more than doubling their property tax rates. Central Utah Water District has just increased their tax rates for our properties. Alpine School District, Nebo School District. And so when you add all of these things up over the last 2 years, it's hundreds, if not thousands of dollars for the average family in Utah County, which is a lot. And so, I mean, I don't know what the numbers are for this. Commissioner Graves mentioned, or maybe, sorry, Nathan did, $50 a year, maybe. But when you add that to $700, it's a lot of money. So I would encourage doing, you know, as you've talked about already doing, decreasing something, seeing what waste is possibly there before increasing property taxes, which are across the board already going up. And I know nothing, you know, firm is being considered tonight, and so I may be back in the future to talk more about that, but that's those are my thoughts. And
So just because you said nothing firm, what we actually would decide tonight is a dollar amount to have that discussion.
right,
So,
right, but not whether or not that's
right,
Correct.
right.
Correct.
Thank you.
And just for clarification purposes, if we maintained the same rate that we had, which was about a 6% slide, it would be an average of $8.89 per household.
Okay,
So
yeah, I didn't know what number it
and
was,
that
but somebody
creates
said 50.
That creates between 1.5 and 1.7 million dollars of revenue that we could use. So hypothetically, if we said we want 1.5 million extra, you know, to use, and then we would specifically state what that purpose is for, you know, general fund, salaries, whatever we might dedicate it for, that particular number would equate to about $8.89 for
Right.
the average house.
Which I agree doesn't sound like a lot, and that was, but when you add it to $15 a month, you know, for Pleasant Grove, and then $30 a
And
month
I-
for the Alpine School District,
But that's
it does
a
add.
point that is heavily considered and concerned. And that's why I appreciated Chris's presentation, where it gets frustrating for me, because as those other entities increase, we actually get less of the pie because we're not moving it.
Right.
It's so counterproductive in my head, it's hard to fathom.
Then as taxpayers,
But-
more of our pie is taken. That's,
Yeah,
I mean, that's my
and that's
point.
where, and
Right.
that's, for me personally, in this setting, that's where it gets really frustrating for me. I'm like, okay, because I don't do something that I don't want to do and try and act fiscally responsible, we get essentially punished with not getting as much road funding.
And that's a
it-
bigger discussion on the
Yeah, it's a
role of
bigger
government.
discussion, but I think as your illustration, it plays into the broad discussion of how all these things are somewhat interconnected as we look at the complexity of the property taxes, and why I love flat tax, because it just makes life easier.
I won't,
But that's a
I won't
whole-
oppose if that.
That's a whole nother,
when we need him?
that's a whole nother discussion. Thank you for your comments. Additional public comments are certainly welcome.
Ralph Clegg of the Health Department. I don't want to take a lot of time away from the public. I think their comments are probably the most important. And I don't envy the commission your job, but I'm pleased to see that you're at least willing to talk about the issue and get input into it and things. There's just a couple of things I'd ask that your members go through the process. And some of them have been pretty well expressed. Our employees are the most important asset we have. And while we don't offer all the services some other areas do, which means we'd have fewer employees, of course, but with fewer employees, we need to be able to recruit and retain those employees in order to give the services with fewer, that we do give with fewer employees. And that's kind of hard to have it happen when our registers have one or two applicants, which is frequently the case anymore. You know, we have difficulty filling the positions, and our choices are kind of limited in those kinds of terms. I'd encourage the commission, regardless of what comes out, to try to keep the salary surveys or schedules current with COLAs, so that we don't have, after a few years, that big bump we have to do, which is very difficult to fund and to find money for. I think our employees are very fortunate with the benefits they have here. I think they should be grateful for those benefits and the things that the county has done to save money on insurance and other ways. I would hope that at some point the commission would consider increasing the county HSA contribution Since that's been the same since the beginning and our deductibles have gone up, that would be, I think, a good thing for the employees as well if the money can be found for that. I'm very supportive of the healthy lifestyle commitment that we have that requires the employees to buy in if they want to maximize their HSA contribution from the county, that they have some skin in the game and are willing to take some responsibility for their health as well. We also, as Commissioner Graves brought up, we really, with the growth in the north part of the county, we really need to be able to provide our services a little bit better down that way. You know, it takes up to an hour to drive from southern part of Saratoga Springs or Eagle Mountain to Provo, you know. And that's if the traffic's good. I don't know if you've been over in that area, but sometimes I was over there not too long ago trying to get out of an elementary school. And I think I could have driven to Salt Lake faster what it took me to get back to Provo. And so, you know, and those are the challenges that go along with growth. But even, you know, one of our most successful things has been that the space we've leased out there and the services we provided. We've kept really busy out there, and the citizens are very pleased that they have that a little bit closer to them. I think if we just go a little further north into that area where we've got some property now in the Lehigh, Saratoga Springs area, that would serve us well, and have a county building that's more designed for what we need than sometimes what you can find when you're leasing. In fact, right now we're kind of doing a little bit of pushing and shoving with UDOT because they closed off our right-of-way to access that building on the east side there. And to access it from the north side, they have to go clear down and make a U-turn and come back and turn into the facility. And so we're kind of in a catch-22 right there right now. And if we lose that right away, we're really going to need something in the not too distant future. But if you do feel like, you know, and you've already heard that even if we get the 1.7 million, there's probably demands are going to take that up pretty quick, and so that doesn't solve all things. But retaining the rate might be a conservative way to approach it if you decide that those funds are needed for the county. But appreciate your support and the difficult decisions you have to make.
While Richard's walking up, I think it's important to let the public know what Ralph was talking about, because this is what kind of people we have working in Utah County, and I think the citizens need to know. 3 years ago when we were pitched as a commission, we are the ones responsible for the health insurance and stuff like that and evaluating the rates and the reasons for those rates that came to the commission. To say we were panicked would be an understatement. We were very greatly concerned with where cost of insurance was going to go for our employees and things like that, and we instituted this healthy lifestyle living program, and that's what allowed us, because our employees stepped up. They actually, based on all the rates and the stuff we're seeing, have become a healthier, less medically dependent group, and therefore we are able to maintain the current level of health insurance contribution that we do. And when we told them about what we would have to do, they all rose up to the occasion, because we told them what. I flat out said to them, I'm like, I can't go to the taxpayers and ask for a tax increase because you want me to pay 100% of insurance when you're not doing the things we should be doing. So anyway, I just want to give a little background to that.
Richard Nelson, Public Works Director. First of all, I just want to thank you for even taking the time to consider this and to, you know, put a bullseye on yourself to have, you know, tax increases are always that way for elected officials and those that work in local government. So I appreciate your willingness to consider this. Most of my department, as you know, is not funded directly through general fund monies, but it is funded indirectly through general fund, through our internal service funds for our buildings and for our telephones, for our fleet, things like that. And as we move forward, and even with our roads that are funded out of the BNC Road Fund, we typically don't have enough funding there to cover the needs. And I'll use roads for an example. A few years ago, about 3 years ago, we did a study on it to see what it would take to have our roads maintained at the proper levels for our 540 miles of road. It takes around $9 million annually to keep them at the level they should be. We get about $2.9 million a year out of the BNC road monies that go towards our road maintenance. So that leaves us about a $6 million shortfall to be at the optimum level. Now, are we going to be at the optimum level? Probably not. There's always an increased demand with roads, and with the increase in population here in the county, the roads are getting more vehicle miles traveled on them all the time. So there needs to be a source of money, whether that's from the general fund or another source, to help go towards that, to try to keep that asset that the county has in a good working condition. As we look at the buildings and the fleet, we've done pretty good on the fleet and keeping it up to date. The buildings tend to kind of, they age. This building's 30+ years old. Things start to happen when a building's 30 years old. The newer buildings, like the Health and Justice building across the road, is about 15 years old. So there's needs, and Mr. Buman had talked about the need for space for additional attorneys and that here in the downtown Provo area. Mr. Clegg talked about the need for the health department to have additional space in the North County. We have those needs in the building side of it that we need to be looking at and trying to make sure we're providing the services for the public, and for my department to provide the space that the other departments need. That's where it becomes a challenge for us. And I just applaud you for looking at these, and hopefully we can move forward with it.
Okay. Any additional comment? Okay, seeing none, the particular first agenda item is actually not an actionable item. The second actionable item is agenda item number 2. This would be to set the dollar amount of a potential increase in ad valorem property tax revenue. Again, I would emphasize that this particular action would simply be to set the dollar amount of a potential increase. There would be further discussion before that rate and increase was actually to occur. So this action would be for that potential to be then presented as an actionable item in the future at a future publicly noticed meeting. I would bring this to the bench for discussion.
So, Mr. Chair, because, so just so everybody understands, the number I'm going to say is not actually where I think we're going to end up at all. What I believe is in having a full and healthy discussion, as do my other fellow commissioners, they're not afraid of a conversation either. But when you go through this process, the state code is very clear. We have to set a number, and when we go through the actual truth in taxation, you can't go up during the discussion. So if Sheriff Smith comes in and says, we just found out we need $5.5 million and we're only talking about a $4 million increase, we're already sunk. So the number at which I'm throwing out there is a $10 million increase, not $10 million to the overall budget. $10 million meaning if the total revenue was $79,546,114, I'm saying $10 million on that. That way, it still would be funding in the black as current, but it allows for an actual conversation. And again, I'm not even saying that's where I'd vote, because I wouldn't vote for that, because that's not the number we need. But to me, it gives us that room to have the discussion, let the public weigh in. And quite honestly, part of the reason I would say a number that high is because I'm hoping that the public would be engaged when they hear a number like that, specifically because we guess when we talk about service levels. We guess when we believe we know what people want. But what I've learned in this county is what the north end wants is not what the south end wants. And we try and do the best thing that we can to kind of split the baby, and our employees do a great job. It's hard as policy and decision makers to do that if the public doesn't engage, because if they want to trust us, great. But even we don't agree on what that service level is, and we'll get there. But so for me, it's a nice round number. That's kind of why I say that. There's not a rate attached to it. If anybody wonders what that is, that's roughly a 25% increase on the county collection right now, roughly. And that's why, and like I say, it's pretty large. It's also about a 2% on your overall. That's where that $50 per month, $50 annually on your average home price right now it'd be $4.25 monthly extra to your mortgage payment on the average home. That's that number. That's where in my mind, it always started to come down from there. So for me, that's just a number and for a discussion, obviously.
It would certainly trigger discussion. I can guarantee you we have to, then, when I've looked at this for me personally, the number that I've had in mind was something similar to the rate that we've carried in the past, which would put us at about the 1.5 million mark, with that specifically targeted to address salaries in the county, as I feel like that is the gap that we're really facing, or when I look at where we can cut and save, here's an area we can start to address it, but I'm certainly not objected to setting it at a higher dollar amount so that we can have that flexibility as we go through the public conversation.
Yeah, and I understand that this is, not a decision that's, binding in the sense of where we're gonna be. It could come all the way down to zero.
Sure, absolutely.
And so I'm not afraid of the conversation with it until we get to one aspect, and that is that we're throwing out numbers kind of in a guessing fashion, which always makes me nervous that we're just kind of throwing out there and saying, okay, let's see what might happen or where we might wind up without any substantive, these are the numbers that I think we're coming. I see a little bit of that. I'm not saying that it's totally blind, but I'm seeing some in there. But I'm wondering if and for me, I'll just speak for me. I'm wondering though if we look at that and say our overall budget's here and we'd like to see it increase, or we'd like to see these service levels come up and identify what those service levels are. And then we go through a process which is on both sides, which is looking at our revenues and our expenses and seeing what maybe should be reduced or what savings we have, because in any budget, there's times in which there might be $1 million here or $2 million there that we don't need to pay this year, but it can be paid next year. And so there's some savings, and I would hope that if we saw that, knowing what the public is going through on the ballot box this year when it comes to taxation, most of the people that I talk to are just freaked out. They're just like, what in the world's going on? And then, with the conversation that we had a little while ago with the fourth quarter cent sales tax, now that's not on the ballot for consideration, but there's always that looming possibility of it just being imposed. It throws a lot of things into a certain amount of spin that makes me nervous. So I don't mind having the conversation, and I think $10 million is way high, even to put out there for any consideration without some sort of backup with it. I'd be more inclined to put about half in there for conversation, just for conversation purposes, and start there and try to see where we're at. And I would, although I certainly want to clarify that I'm not looking at, this is for conversation purposes. It's not a vote for, the 5 million wouldn't be a vote for, that's where I'd like to wind up. I would like to see if we could, if we're looking at our triggers and our matrix on it and say, we're still healthy enough that we can put this off. For how long? I don't know. But if our numbers come in and say we're still healthy enough to make it work and go in a direction that the service levels work, I would hope that we'd have that kind of conversation and that kind of analysis as we're looking through it.
So I'll give everybody a little insight to me that doesn't know me. I never throw out a number without actually doing some thinking and some math. So here's how I get to $10 million really quick. Now, I could sit here and do the math really quick based on next year's tax, but this is what's important for people to know. We go through a process this year and will not be, so if we adjust the rate right now and we go through the truth in taxation, the collection and use of this tax will be in 2020. So when we're talking about for budgeting purposes, that's why to me, you have to think a little higher, not 10 million necessarily, but that's why you have to think a little higher, because you're actually trying to forecast 2 years from now. And again, you can always lower the rate. It's not hard to lower the rate at all, and it's always very popular, right? So the reality is if we're budgeting $86.25 million this year, we're gonna have a 3% increase, because we have a 3% increase every year. Every year we've been since I've been in the commission, we've gone up to $2.5 million, and the requests are getting larger. That means that next year's anticipated budget would be nearly $89 million. Again, just using the numbers, it doesn't mean that's where we're gonna come in, but that's, if you follow the same sense for where we set the 2017 budget, or excuse me, the 2018 budget, and where the 2018 proposed budget would be, because we have to put some fund balance in, that would be roughly, well, exactly $88,830,000, 314. I was lazy enough to not do the math to the nearest and be under about $1,000, because really I'd be advocating for like a $9,998,000, 10 million. That's why for me it's a discussion. That's why by saying that number, it is large, but then the public will definitely come in and engage, I believe. And again, I'm not even saying I'd vote for that. I'm just saying it's a discussion piece, because it allows the public to come in and say, yeah, I want this. Yes, I want this. And when we go through this, I promise you, just like we do in the budgets, every department head's gonna have to be accountable, because we're gonna put them on a record. Put them on record on why and what this, so that the public can weigh in and say, yes, we need that. No, we don't need that. Because it's their county. We're representatives of them. So that's how and why I get there.
Can I ask you a question on
Sure.
it? So you went off the $86 million one, that wasn't our actuals, it's closer to 83 on our actuals, in what was actually used. And if you put 3% on that, where would it put you? I'm not
On
doing
the 83,
that. 83 million.
that would put me at about $2.4 million instead of 2.6.
85, so we're at 85 and a half.
Yeah, and so then you'd still be just over 88 by 2020.
Yeah, in the 2020, I'm not sure where you're getting that.
But what I'm saying is
where-
if we passed it now, we'd collect it at the end of 2019 for the use in the 2020 budget year. That's what I'm saying. Because the way we budget a year behind our collection. Or excuse me, yes.
Well, the reason why, and Dave, correct me if I'm wrong on this, but the reason why it is set now in the time frame that you're talking about is so that we can put it into place, and then we actually go back, because in May it comes forward. We're projecting on our rate, on our certified rate.
Yeah, you're really not setting the rate, you're just setting the amount of the increase, because the rate will not be set until next summer.
Right.
But Greg's right, the collection, if it is increased, then the collection of that increased rate would not occur until
November
the end
30th.
Till
The deadline
taxes
is
are paid
November
the end of
30th.
November of next year.
Of
So they would be
2019.
available for the 2020 budget
budget.
year.
Okay.
Which is the hard part, because again, you're right, we may be healthy right now. We're not in dire straits, obviously. But when we just opened the budget for the widely publicized incident at the jail, we had the county clerk auditor sit here and talk about, even though there's $28 million in reserves, there's not really $28 million. There's only X amount. Even when you add the capital expense, it's not fully available. And that's the concerning part, is we are actually dipping into that money now. You're right. In past, truthfully, how they got to the $9.5 million is they over-collected and they had to put it aside. And again, the reason I'm willing to say these kind of numbers is because as I leave, I know there are 3 people up here. I don't have to worry. If there was an over-collection, there would not be an over-collection for very long, because they would rectify it. I know that. I have that trust. So that's why, to me, the discussion is, but, you know, part of what the whole reason I ran is because when I got done serving, regardless of what the time was, I wanted to leave this county in better shape for the future. And I've always told everybody, the greatest fear I have is in 20 years, because I'll be here, my kids will be here, and they'll be closer to my age now. You know, and so, but my fear is that they'll come back and say, Dad, what in the world were you thinking when you were on the commission? Why did you guys make that decision? Look what you have done to us. And so everything I've ever done in the commission and thought about is always making sure that we're not hindering the future, and I don't believe we have, but making sure we're better prepared for the future. The analogy I gave, and just so people know how and why I also believe this, I think now that we've talked about the inflationary fix, I think that the legislature will address this because this county will kind of bring that up. But I always look at it this way: when you're looking in your own wallet, we all have jobs, or the majority of people have jobs, especially when unemployment is what it is. When you take that job, do you take your pay and never ask for a pay raise from day one? No, because expenses rise, everything increases, right? What this county has always done, and I mean the county government itself, not all the taxing entities, but what this county government has done since the mid-'80s is let everybody else increase for those and continue to say, we're fine. Of course, we weren't growing at this rate, so we were able to do that a little bit, but they were able to just collect and keep speed, but decreasing their amount and continue to do more with less. We're not at that point. We're not at that point anymore. Let me give you a case in point. The commission has now hired their own lobbyist. We hired our own lobbyist this last year to fight for the rights of Utah County's residents. One of the best decisions we've made. It really is. We got a lot of good things done, and those are things that only larger counties start to do. And I remember, and this is where I moved on this, because Commissioner Lee said something to me that really struck me and stuck with me when he said it to me 2 years ago. He said, Greg, if we're really going to be the second largest county, then we need to act like it legislatively. And, he's right. And we have started to do those things. So to me, this is that process that helps us start to look at it. That doesn't mean we charge the second highest rate. I would never, ever say that, because we don't need 5 times the amount we're collecting. We don't. We are way different. We are way better than that. Doesn't mean we don't need a couple percent or a couple dollars here or there to help keep up the services our public demands. So that's my dollar amount proposal, again, just because it is an amount. But there was some math that went into it.
I think the other equation, as we consider and discuss the amount that we could potentially look at to set that amount, is the amount over the past couple of years that we've budgeted into reserves. Obviously, there was a budgeted amount of $6.7 million. The year before, I believe it was a budgeted amount of close to $7 million. The actualities have come back in the $3 to $4 million range, which would allow us to safely set a rate at about $5 million, which allows, again, it gets us back to where we're operating and moving in a positive direction. And so, again, those aren't numbers. I recognize they are round numbers, but they are grounded in some historical look.
Yeah, and I just, there was a couple of comments I wanted to, and I could, for conversation purposes, probably get behind at least moving the conversation with a number like that. When we're talking about our fund balance, though, the only statutory minimum that we have to have in there is that $3.667 roughly $million that we have to have in there. And the rest of it, the unassigned that we have, like the Medicaid reserve, which is $600,000, the equipment replacement, $3 million, a little over $3 million. Presidential elections, we have $1 million in there. Although those things have a knockdown on our reserves that we have out there, the only one statutorily that we have to have that balance in is that reserve, which is about $3,600,000 in there. So we have we have flexibility, and as I'm looking at the numbers over the years and where we're at, and we do have a dip, and I totally agree there's a collide that's happening, that has happened with our budget. If we want to go through this process and talk about it, hopefully we can talk about all of it, and on every aspect, where we possibly can cut, and cut's kind of a hard word, because a lot of people say, oh, we're already right to the bone right now. And because we're at the bone right now, we want to increase, not cut. And that's what I hear from some of the department heads on this, is that we need more, we don't need less, or we don't need to look at it less. But if we can have an honest conversation with it and look at not just the departments, but actually what we're doing this next year, and find ways to reduce, I'd be willing to go through that conversation.
Oh, I agree. I wholeheartedly agree. I mean, kind of like we did with the salary study, we talked to department heads. Again, I'm not even saying I'll vote for a tax increase, because when we go through that process, everybody needs to be accountable, meaning all of the department heads, and why, so that the public can engage in that process. And if we're not, and if a department doesn't want to come and be accounted for, I don't care what they've told me behind closed doors, if they need $4 million. If they don't want to come and stand up and be accountable so that we can have those open and transparent conversations, then to me, it's not a real request. And so that's,
So Greg, I gotta ask you one question,
Yeah.
because you've said this to me multiple times in the past. That you'd never vote for a tax increase if it was for salary.
no, I won't. So the reason is I will never vote for a tax increase for just salary, because I understand there's a cost of increase. But for me, this county is, and I hate to say it this way, because there's good and there's bad. Turnover is a good thing, but it's also a bad thing. The experience we'll lose, as we all know as a commission, we have over 27% of our people eligible for retirement. Our largest portion is salaries. So as those people leave, we will have a decrease in the budget, and that's why I say we'll slowly start to build that up, and we'll have that difference. And that way you guys would either, in the future, take that cash and build the things we need without bonding, and or lower the tax rate, because now we're flush and we don't need to overcollect. I have all the faith in the world on that. That's why I say when we come, though, and we talk about court cases and keeping up with the number of people, and we talk about school nurses in that, I know their salaries, but they are actual services that provide and help. So to me, I would never implement a salary study and then they say, well, you're under market $7 million, and go to the taxpayers and say, well, we have to raise taxes $7 million. I would never do that. But people mean continued service at the same level. And so as the growth happens, that's the kind of thing. So to me, the salary study, even the one we just did, I was never, I always looked at it and said, if we can't do it within the budget, then we've got to look at something else. That's why I always kept pushing that $9 million, and I keep calling it the slush fund that the previous commissioners moved it over to. I kept advocating, hey, let's pull it in and let's fund what we can or what we agree to fund. And so, yeah, I absolutely still stand by that.
Perfect. All right. Any additional discussion? Again, I would, given this is a public meeting, we are here for input. You've heard some of the discussion here. I would open agenda item number 2 up for general public comment. Seeing none, we'll close general
I
public.
couldn't even take the heat for the number if you guys.
So, all right, seeing none, I'll bring discussion back up to the bench. I know, as I've expressed, I certainly personally would be very comfortable with the 5 million number, and I arrived at based on where we budgeted into reserves in the past.
Well, so
And I'm not disagreeing with how you
Sure.
got to the 10. For me, I think I know flat out I wouldn't vote for that. And I think you create a lot of public clamor, and it could potentially harm the quality of the discussion.
but again, it's the public's money, so I'm okay with the public clamor. But with what we've already had requested that we know about for next year's increases, and again, I'm not advocating for $10 million. I'll tell you that right now. It just gives it a discussion. I understand how you get to a $5 million increase. I'm not so sure that's where we won't end up, or even a little lower, right? I'm not saying that either way. I'm just saying there's no reason to go through this process without having the flexibility, because if the public comes in and hears, well, yeah, we want that, and we explain to them, this costs us an extra $1 million, or, this happens or this happens, I think we need that flexibility. It's not, again, I'm not advocating for a $10 million increase. I'm just saying, if we're going through this process, I think the most prudent thing is to have the ability to have every discussion. And again, we might all three be voting no for 0 tax increase, 0 change. I mean, who knows, right? So that's why I say it that way. So,
Commissioner Lee, additional thoughts? Are we ready for a
No.
motion?
I'm uncomfortable in a lot of the respects, but I don't mind having the conversation and, moving it forward. I just don't want to have more of it, I guess, than what I think is at least a reasonable conversation with it.
Okay,
Okay, how about we do this? This is in looking, well, I mean, you guys still have your own votes, but if we maybe meet in the middle, because the one part I wasn't thinking about when I did my math was the new growth of 1.5. So what if we go to like 7.5 million for a discussion, because we can have then all the new growth and maybe by then even more accurate numbers. Then we have a wiggle room. And again, it's still not saying I'm going to end up at 7.5. I'm waiting to hear from everybody else too. So.
okay, that's swallowable. I still am concerned about the,
Sure. Well, and again, I'm not saying it because, you know,
again, am I,
Well, I can let you two pass it if you want to pass it that way then.
so we want a motion in.
I would entertain a motion.
Okay, I will motion that we set the amount for a potential increase in ad valorem property tax revenue to be $7.5 million for the discussion for truth and taxation.
For a second? I will suspend the rules in second for the purpose of moving to a vote. All those in favor of setting the dollar amount for potential increase in ad valorem property tax revenue at 7.5 million, please say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed?
Nay.
The motion will carry 2-1. Again, I would emphasize this is a discussion item to be considered, and I am sure we will have the opportunity to engage with the public through several avenues as we move forward. And again, that's a heavy emphasis on that this is a discussion item.
And a strong echo.
Okay. Any additional public comment?
Motion to adjourn.
Second.
I have a motion and a second to adjourn. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Motion will carry 3-0.